What if the greatest threat to human life wasn't war, but the men who led them? These 15 leaders weren't just powerful, they were deadly, each leaving a trail of death, destruction, and horror. How many lives can one man destroy? History remembers power, but often forgets its cost. These 15 leaders caused unimaginable suffering, from engineered famines to genocides. Some ruled by ideology, others by conquest or fear. Yet all earned their place in history's bloodiest pages, through the sheer number of deaths under their rule. 1. Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong led China through a turbulent era marked by ideological purges, famine, and forced collectivization. His policies, especially the Great Leap Forward, triggered catastrophic consequences. Estimates of the death toll during his reign reach as high as 45 million, mostly from starvation and political persecution. The Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1962, was a utopian economic campaign. Instead, it collapsed agriculture, ruined industry, and triggered one of history's worst famines. Rural communities starved as grain quotas were unrealistically inflated, and local officials falsified production data to avoid punishment. Mao refused to admit failure. During the Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976, Mao unleashed chaos to reassert his dominance. Red Guards targeted intellectuals, teachers, and party officials. Millions were persecuted, imprisoned, tortured, or killed. The campaign destroyed China's cultural heritage, education system, and trust in authority, while solidifying Mao's control through fear and indoctrination. Despite the human cost, Mao remains a complex symbol in China. Official narratives balance his achievements with his crimes. To the Communist Party, he is a founding father. To historians, he's one of the deadliest figures in human history, whose power came at a massive human price. 2. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin transformed the Soviet Union into a global superpower, but at an immense human cost. Through purges, famines, forced labor, and war, Stalin's rule caused the deaths of over 20 million people. Terror was not a byproduct, it was a deliberate method of governance. The Holodomor famine, 1932–33, in Ukraine remains a key atrocity. Stalin's grain requisition policies starved millions to death. This man-made famine is considered by many as genocide. Stalin ignored pleas for help, sealed borders, and punished those who tried to aid the starving, solidifying totalitarian control. The Great Purge, 1936–1938, was Stalin's paranoid crusade against perceived enemies. Millions were arrested, tortured, and executed or exiled to gulags. Party leaders, military commanders, and even loyal communists were liquidated. This campaign decimated Soviet leadership and instilled a climate of fear for decades to come. World War II added more bloodshed. Stalin signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Hitler, invaded Poland, and later turned on Germany. He sacrificed millions of Soviet soldiers in brutal battles. After the war, he imposed repressive regimes across Eastern Europe, and began the Cold War through nuclear ambition and iron-fisted rule. 3. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime orchestrated the Holocaust, World War II, and a totalitarian state driven by hatred. He rose to power through propaganda, fear, and ultranationalism. Under his rule, at least 17 million civilians died, including 6 million Jews in the most systematic genocide in history. The Holocaust was Hitler's final solution. Jews, Roma, disabled people, and others were labeled subhuman. They were rounded up, deported to death camps, and exterminated. Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor became industrialized slaughterhouses. The Nazi machine combined bureaucracy and ideology to produce mass murder on a horrifying scale. World War II began with Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939. Germany's blitzkrieg tactics devastated Europe. Tens of millions perished in the conflict. His military strategy disregarded human cost, seen in the Eastern Front, where entire cities were bombed, starved, or destroyed in prolonged sieges. Hitler's suicide in 1945 ended his brutal reign, but the scars remain. He turned a democratic state into a fascist regime, fueling war, genocide, and ruin. His name is now synonymous with evil, and a chilling reminder of how ideology, racism, and power can destroy civilization. 4. Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold II personally controlled the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908, treating it as his private colony. Under his regime, forced labor and brutal punishments devastated the Congolese population. An estimated 10 million people died, through murder, starvation, disease, and mutilation in the name of rubber profits. Villagers were forced to meet impossible rubber quotas. If they failed, soldiers cut off the hands of workers, children, or their families. Entire communities were wiped out. The force publique, Leopold's private army, ruled through terror, maintaining order with guns, whips, and severed limbs as punishment. Christian missionaries and whistleblowers eventually exposed the atrocities. Photos of mutilated children and reports of massacres shocked Europe. Public outrage forced Belgium to take over administration in 1908, but by then, millions had already perished. Leopold enriched himself while millions died under his silence. Leopold never visited the Congo but reaped immense wealth from it. Despite global condemnation, he was celebrated in Belgium during his life. His colonial crimes were later recognized as one of the most brutal exploitations in history. He remains a chilling example of imperial greed without accountability or remorse. 5. Hideki Tojo. As Japan's prime minister during World War II, Hideki Tojo oversaw a militarized, expansionist regime. He approved the attack on Pearl Harbor and led Japan's brutal campaigns across Asia. His government committed war crimes, leading to the deaths of over 5 million civilians and prisoners of war. The rape of Nanking remains one of the most horrific massacres of the 20th century. Japanese forces murdered up to 300,000 Chinese civilians. Women were raped, families slaughtered, and cities burned. Tojo's army acted with impunity, following a doctrine that dehumanized enemies and glorified ruthless conquest. Tojo's rule saw the use of forced labor, human experimentation, and starvation. Unit 731 conducted biological warfare experiments on living prisoners. Civilians in the Philippines, Korea, and China suffered under Japanese occupation. Tojo's government systematically erased humanity in pursuit of imperial glory and racial superiority. After Japan's surrender in 1945, Tojo was arrested, tried for war crimes, and executed in 1948. He remained unrepentant. Though some in Japan later viewed him as a patriot, global history remembers him as a militarist dictator responsible for mass suffering and brutal war atrocities. 6. Ismail Enver Pasha. Enver Pasha was a key leader of the Ottoman Empire during World War I. As Minister of War, he orchestrated military disasters and presided over one of the first genocides of the 20th century, the Armenian Genocide, leading to over 1.5 million deaths. In 1915, under Enver's direction, Armenians were labeled traitors. They were rounded up, deported, and systematically killed. Death marches through the Syrian desert saw thousands perish from starvation, exhaustion, or slaughter. Women and children were raped, abducted, or sold. It was state-engineered ethnic cleansing. Enver's alliance with Germany dragged the Ottoman Empire into war. His failed Sarıkamış campaign against Russia caused over 80,000 Turkish soldier deaths. His poor planning and disregard for logistics exposed his incompetence, yet he clung to power, scapegoating ethnic minorities for military failures. After the war, Enver fled the empire but continued stirring rebellion in Central Asia. He was eventually killed in battle in 1922. Despite his death, the legacy of his crimes endured. His role in the Armenian genocide remains a dark chapter that modern Turkey still struggles to fully acknowledge or reconcile. 7. Pol Pot. Pol Pot led Cambodia's Khmer Rouge regime from 1975 to 1979, initiating a brutal social experiment. He aimed to create a communist utopia by erasing modernity, class, and culture. The result was genocide. Up to 2 million people, a quarter of Cambodia's population, died. Cities were emptied. Doctors, teachers, and intellectuals were executed for being bourgeois. Wearing glasses or speaking a foreign language could mean death. Pol Pot's agrarian dream turned into a nightmare, where backbreaking labor, starvation, and purges decimated the population in rural labor camps. The infamous killing fields became mass graves. Torture centers like Tul Sleng processed thousands before execution. Families were separated, children were indoctrinated. The regime banned religion, currency, and education. Paranoia reigned, and even loyal Khmer Rouge members were often accused of treason and murdered. Vietnam invaded in 1979, toppling Pol Pot's regime. He fled to the jungle and continued guerrilla warfare for years. Pol Pot died in 1998 without facing trial. His legacy is one of radical ideology taken to its deadliest extreme, and a generation lost to the madness of enforced revolution. 8. Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung ruled North Korea from 1948 until his death in 1994. He built a totalitarian state marked by cult worship, extreme isolation, and brutal repression. Under his leadership, millions died from war, purges, and famine, as the country became a prison sealed from the world. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, initiated by Kim's invasion of the South, caused over 3 million deaths. Cities were flattened, and civilians massacred. The North became heavily militarized, and Kim entrenched himself as the great leader, using fear, propaganda, and violence to maintain total control over society. Kim created a dynasty, indoctrinating citizens with absolute loyalty. Those deemed disloyal were executed or sent to prison camps. Entire families vanished into the gulags. Religion was banned, media censored, and information from the outside world blocked. A single insult could lead to generational punishment. In the 1990s, famine struck, killing up to 2 million. Yet Kim diverted resources to military projects and nuclear ambitions. He left behind a regime that still holds power through terror. Kim Il-sung's legacy is one of control, cultism, and suffering, the architect of one of the world's most repressive states. 9. Mengistu Haile Mariam. Mengistu ruled Ethiopia from 1977 to 1991 under a Marxist-Leninist dictatorship. He came to power through a bloody coup, later unleashing the Red Terror. Tens of thousands were executed, and over 1 million died from famine, repression, and war during his authoritarian reign. The Red Terror targeted opponents real and imagined. Bodies piled in the streets. Children were forced to watch their parents executed. Dissenters were tortured, jailed, or disappeared. Mengistu personally smashed bottles of blood on podiums, symbolizing his vengeance. He ruled with cruelty and paranoia, silencing opposition with bullets. The 1983 to 1985 famine devastated Ethiopia, killing over 1 million. Mengistu's regime worsened the crisis by diverting aid, blocking relief, and prioritizing military campaigns. Villages were forcibly relocated, increasing suffering. International outrage grew, but Mengistu remained focused on ideological control, not humanitarian relief. Facing internal collapse and rebel advances, Mengistu fled to Zimbabwe in 1991. He was later convicted of genocide in absentia but never extradited. Protected by Robert Mugabe, he lived in comfort while millions mourned. His rule marked one of Africa's darkest periods, driven by Marxist zealotry and brutal oppression. 10. Idi Amin. Idi Amin seized power in Uganda in 1971, ruling with madness, brutality, and bizarre grandiosity. His regime killed an estimated 300,000 people. Torture, mass executions, and ethnic purges became daily reality. He declared himself conqueror of the British Empire, but left Uganda in ruin and horror. Amin targeted tribes and opponents, including the Akoli and Lango peoples. Bodies were dumped in rivers. Torture chambers filled prisons. He personally ordered killings, sometimes filming them. Even his own ministers and military officers lived in fear, knowing that loyalty meant nothing under his unpredictable wrath. In 1972, he expelled 60,000 Asians from Uganda, destroying the economy. Many of them were successful business owners. Factories, farms, and shops collapsed. Amin's economic mismanagement plunged Uganda into poverty and chaos, while he continued lavish celebrations and eccentric pronouncements. In 1979, Amin invaded Tanzania and was defeated in return. He fled to Saudi Arabia, where he lived peacefully until his death in 2003. Never tried for his crimes, Amin remains one of Africa's most notorious dictators, a man whose cruelty was matched only by his delusions of grandeur. 11. Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini founded fascism and ruled Italy from 1922 to 1943. He crushed dissent, invaded nations, and aligned with Hitler in World War II. His regime caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands, through colonial atrocities, political repression, and reckless military campaigns that tore Italy apart. In Libya and Ethiopia, Mussolini waged brutal colonial wars. His forces used chemical weapons, bombed civilians, and built concentration camps. Entire villages were wiped out. Mussolini sought to rebuild the Roman Empire, but his conquests only brought suffering to the people he claimed to civilize. Domestically, Mussolini eliminated political opposition through imprisonment, exile, and execution. He built a fascist police state, banning unions and suppressing freedom. While initially popular, his propaganda masked growing failure. By the late 1930s, his alliance with Hitler dragged Italy into a war it wasn't prepared to fight. World War II was catastrophic for Italy. Mussolini's poor leadership led to military disasters. He was ousted in 1943, rescued by the Nazis, and made puppet ruler in northern Italy. Captured by partisans in 1945, Mussolini was executed. His body was hung upside down, a grim end for the founder of fascism. 12. Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq from 1979 to 2003 with brutality, paranoia, and absolute power. He waged war on neighbors and citizens alike, using chemical weapons, mass executions, and torture. Over 1 million people died due to his actions, making him one of the region's deadliest rulers. Saddam's Anfal campaign against the Kurds in the 1980s included chemical attacks like the Halabja massacre. Entire villages were gassed. Thousands died instantly, others suffered lifelong injuries. The operation also involved mass deportations, forced disappearances, and the destruction of over 4,000 Kurdish villages. The Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988, caused over 1 million deaths. Saddam initiated the conflict with dreams of dominance, but it became a prolonged, bloody stalemate. He deployed chemical weapons repeatedly, showing no regard for civilian or soldier lives. Iraq was left economically drained and socially devastated. His 1990 invasion of Kuwait triggered the Gulf War. After defeat, Saddam brutally repressed uprisings, killing tens of thousands of Shia and Kurdish civilians. International sanctions followed, deepening Iraq's suffering. Saddam ruled through fear, propaganda, and violence until the U.S. invasion in 2003. He was captured, tried, and executed in 2006. 13. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan founded the Mongol Empire, the largest land empire in history. His conquests in the 13th century left an estimated 40 million dead. Entire cities were leveled, and populations erased. While he unified tribes and promoted trade, his campaigns were marked by relentless and calculated slaughter. The Mongols used terror as a weapon. Cities that resisted faced total destruction. In Nishapur, up to 1.7 million were killed. Baghdad's libraries and hospitals were burned in 1258. Survivors often had their heads stacked in pyramids, symbols of submission to the Khan's brutal authority. Genghis Khan demanded loyalty, and punished betrayal with annihilation. He wiped out entire dynasties, empires, and peoples. Yet he also imposed law, religious tolerance, and trade routes like the Silk Road. This paradox makes him both a visionary ruler and a mass killer. Today, views on Genghis Khan vary widely. In Mongolia, he is revered as a national hero and unifier. Globally, he is remembered as a military genius whose legacy was soaked in blood. His empire forever changed Asia and Europe, and reshaped history through both brutality and brilliance. 14. Nero. Nero ruled the Roman Empire from 54 to 68 AD. He's infamous for cruelty, extravagance, and the alleged burning of Rome. Though exact figures are lost to time, his reign saw thousands executed, from senators and philosophers to his own mother and pregnant wife. Nero blamed Christians for the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. He launched the empire's first major persecution. Victims were burned alive or torn apart in arenas. Tacitus describes horrifying public executions, using human torches to light Nero's gardens at night for amusement. Paranoia consumed Nero. He executed rivals, forced political suicides, and killed family members. Roman senators lived in constant fear. The philosopher Seneca, once his tutor, was ordered to kill himself. Nero's cruelty and instability weakened imperial rule and bred rebellion within the empire. Eventually, revolts erupted. Declared an enemy of the state, Nero committed suicide in 68 AD, the first Roman emperor to do so. His death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Nero remains a symbol of tyranny and madness, a ruler whose name evokes fire, blood, and imperial decline. 15. Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin led the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution and founded the Soviet Union. Though often overshadowed by Stalin, Lenin's rule laid the foundation for decades of terror. His Red Terror campaign, civil war policies, and forced famine led to millions of deaths during and after his rise. The Red Terror of 1918 to 1922 saw mass executions, torture, and prison camps. Lenin's Cheka targeted priests, nobles, and political enemies. Thousands were shot without trial. Lenin defended the violence as necessary for revolution, initiating the Soviet tradition of silencing dissent through fear and repression. His war communism policies caused widespread famine. Peasants were forced to surrender grain. In 1921, millions starved, especially in the Volga region. Lenin responded by crushing peasant revolts. Though he later allowed limited capitalism under the NEP, the damage to rural populations was already immense. Lenin suppressed other socialist factions like the Mensheviks and anarchists. The Kronstadt Rebellion, launched by former allies, was brutally crushed. By the time of his death in 1924, Lenin had built a one-party dictatorship. Though deified by Soviet propaganda, his rule introduced systematic political terror. Power without limits becomes lethal. From emperors to modern dictators, these men shaped history through death. Their legacies are warnings, about ideology, fear, and unchecked control. To learn from history, we must confront its darkest chapters. Like, comment, and subscribe for more buried truths revealed. See you in the next video.